It is January 8th, 2025 with the VIHE online. And we're reading through Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, Canto 7, Chapter 6, Text 9 through 18. Ko griheshu praman shaktam atmanam ajitendriya sneha pashar dridarbadam utsa eta vimochitam. This sneha pashar should look familiar to everybody. That's right out of Queen Kunti's prayers. The sneha pasha is also there in the statements of Maharaj Chitraketu's wife. Why are you breaking the sneha pashu? What person too attached to household life, due to being unable to control his senses, can liberate himself? An attached householder is bound very strongly by ropes of affection for his family, wife, children, and other relatives. Ko nyarta trishnam visrajet pranebhyo piya ipsitaha yam krinyat yasubir preshtaist Taskara sevako vanik. Money is so dear that one conceives of money as being sweeter than honey. Therefore, who can give up the desire to accumulate money, especially in household life? Thieves, professional servants, soldiers, and merchants. 3 examples. Try to acquire money even by risking their very dear life. And you notice here we have arta trishnam. Trishna means thirst, which Prabhupada's translating as sweeter than honey. Katam priyaya anukampitayaha sangam rahasyam ruchiramscha mantram suritstutat sneha sita shishunam kalashanarnam anurakta chitta putram smaransta duhitrir ridaya Britanrin swastirva pitaruchadino griham mamognoru parichadamscha vritischa kulya pasu brityavargan twajeta koshastrid ive hamana karmani labhad aviritpakama anupastya jaivam bahumanyamana Katam viraje jeta duranta moha. How can a person who is most affectionate to his family, the core of his heart being always filled with their pictures, give up their association? Sometimes the walls of one's house are also literally filled with their pictures. Specifically, a wife is always very kind and sympathetic and always pleases her husband in a solitary place. Who could give up the association of such a dear and affectionate wife? Small children talk in broken language, very pleasing to hear, and their affectionate father always thinks of their sweet words. How could he give up their association? One's elderly parents and one's sons and daughters are also very dear. A daughter is especially dear to her father, and while living at her husband's house, she is always in his mind. Who could give up that association? Aside from this, in household affairs, there are many decorated items of household furniture, and there are also animals and servants. Who could give up such comforts? The attached householder is like a silkworm, which weaves a cocoon in which it becomes imprisoned, unable to get out. Simply for the satisfaction of 2 important senses, the genitals and the tongue, one is bound by material conditions. How can one escape? Kutumbapos aya viyanijayur nabudyate ritam vahatam pramata sarvatratapa traya dukitatma nirvidyate na swa kutumbaramaha. One who is too attached cannot understand that he is wasting his valuable life for the maintenance of his family. He also fails to understand that the purpose of human life, a life suitable for realization of the absolute truth, is being imperceptibly spoiled. However, he is very cleverly attentive to seeing that not a single farthing is lost by mismanagement. Thus, although an attached person in material existence always suffers from 3-fold miseries, he does not develop a distaste for the way of material existence. Viteshu nitya bini vishtacheta vidamschadosam paravitta hartu prajehava Prajehavitapja jitendriyastad ashantakamo harate kutumbi. If a person too attached to the duties of family maintenance is unable to control his senses, the core of his heart is immersed in how to accumulate money. Although he knows that one who takes the wealth of others will be punished by the law of the government and by the laws of Yamaraj after death, he continues cheating others to acquire money. Vidvam atitam danuja katumbam pushnam swalokaya nakalpateva yashri aparakya viminabhavas tama prapadyeta yata vimudaha. Oh, my friend, son of demons, in this material world, even those who are apparently advanced in education have the propensity to consider this is mine and that is for others. Thus, they are always engaged in providing the necessities of life to their families in a limited conception of family life, just like uneducated cats and dogs. They are unable to take to spiritual knowledge. Instead, they are bewildered and overcome by ignorance. Yato nakaschid kwa chakutrachid va dina swam atmanam alam samarta vimochitam kama drisam vidhara krido mrigo yan nir gado visarga tato vidurat parhigritcha daitya daityeshu sangam vishayatmakeshu upecha narayanam adidevam samukta sangar ishito pravargaha. My dear friends, O sons of the demons, it is certain that no one bereft of knowledge of the Supreme Personality of Godhead has been able to liberate himself from material bondage at any time or in any country. Rather, those bereft of knowledge of the Lord are bound by the material laws. They are factually addicted to sense gratification, and their target is woman. Indeed, they are actually playthings in the hands of attractive women. Victimized by such a conception of life, they become surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, and thus they are shackled to material bondage. Those who are very much addicted to this conception of life are called demons. Therefore, although you are sons of demons, keep aloof from such persons and take shelter of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Narayana, the origin of all the demigods, because the ultimate goal for the devotees of Narayana is liberation from the bondage of material existence. So, again, this is verses 9 through 18, and the summary of this section is that material life is strongly entangling, even for those who are educated, and the only solution is to take shelter of Narayana. So some questions that are answered here for us in our life are, how do we know that we're entangled? What are the external manifestations of material attachment? And what are the solutions? And the themes of this section is that the nature of family is entanglement in various attachments and relationships with people and wealth that keep us in illusion. And we need to specifically cultivate detachment from these and attachment to Narayana. Okay, so looking at first section of verses is verses 9 and 10 about the strong attachment in materialistic householder life. So in text 9, Prabhupada reiterates something that he has been saying over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. The ashram system, brahmachari, grahastha, vanaprastha, and sannyas, is essential to avoid getting entangled in family attachment, which will prevent liberation. So Prabhupada's not only presenting bhakti, but ashram dharma. Ashram dharma is material. However, Prabhupada is saying that it is essential if we don't want to get entangled. Of course, we might argue that only bhakti is essential, that even if your ashram aspect of your life is a mess, and in 2025 in the world, not only in Western countries, but even in India, even in very traditional Eastern countries, Indonesia, Japan, most people's life in terms of ashram dharma is a mess. So we could say, well, if ashram system is essential, what are we going to do? And I personally don't see that we're going to be able to reestablish ashram dharma in the world at large, or even among the members of the Hare Krishna movement anytime in the immediate future. I just don't see an interest or a proclivity towards it. I see an interest in Varna Dharma. I do not see much of an interest in ashram dharma. Some, I mean, there are there, but as a general, if we were going to say, you know, like 95% of people are not really very interested in the actual principles of ashram dharma. So what are we going to do? Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur, in his commentary to text 9, says one can perfect one's worship only by producing attachment to worship and by being unattached to anything else. So obviously, if we can, whatever we can take of ashram dharma, whatever we can take up, we should. But the main thing is becoming attached to the Lord. Okay, text 10. Money is dearer than one's life. And it's interesting that there's the word honey. Madhu is not in the verse. The word trishna is there, a great thirst. So there's a great thirst for money. Of course, it's interesting that if we're going to look at Varna Dharma, the Vaishyas are described later on in the Bhagavatam as having, as always being thirsty. That's their job, is actually to always be thirsty for wealth because they are the wealth producers in society. If a Vaishya is just satisfied with 1 or 2 cows and, you know, 1/4 of an acre of land, then they can't feed the world. So they have this trishna, this thirst. So here it's called arta trishna. And the word arta is also interesting, although we generally translate arta as economic development, or here Prabhupada is just translating it as money. Of course, in ancient times, economic development was definitely not as money dependent as it is in our society because they did a lot of barter. Even in our society, the people who are the richest people in the world, it's not that, you know, Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos have stacks and stacks and stacks of cash lying around. A lot of their wealth is in assets. So property and homes and cars and airplanes and stocks that they hold. And in ancient times, of course, people also had the idea of wealth as being in goods like land and animals and houses and things. It wasn't just in cash. And in fact, as I said, in ancient times, people used some means of exchange, some kind of money, less than we use it today, because they were also engaged in more barter. So to just translate arta as money is interesting. The word arta literally means anything that's good. Like when we talked about anarta nivritti, getting rid of your anartas, we're not talking about giving away all of your money. We're not talking about giving away all of your money or cash. We're certainly not talking about giving away all of your possessions. We're talking about getting rid of attachments. So this word arta can mean anything that's valuable, interestingly enough. It can mean anything that has value. And anartas are anything that doesn't have value. And anarta is specifically something that looks like it has value, but doesn't have value. All right. And then on top of this, Srila Prabhupada doesn't say a strong thirst for valuables, which would be a literal translation. He says that money is sweeter than honey. So it's just Prabhupada's, shall we say, poetic translation, which he does sometimes. Of course, the Bhagavatam itself is poetry. And then there's, how do we know that people have this kind of insatiable thirst for wealth? Prahlad gives 3 examples: a thief, a mercenary, and a merchant. So if you're a merchant, especially, if there's traveling involved, like if you're traveling by boat, or you're traveling by plane, or traveling by car in order to make money, you're putting your life at risk, right? I mean, of course, we all travel by vehicles all the time. We might not think of it, but uh, the merchant is putting his life at risk by traveling, and especially, I don't know what their means of travel was at the beginning of the universe in Prahlad Maharaj's day. I'm sure they had airplanes. But if we think about, say, a few hundred years ago when people were merchants by ship and how dangerous that was. So they're literally risking their lives in order to acquire money. And a mercenary, a soldier of fortune, someone who's paid to be a soldier, they're also literally risking their life to make money. And then a thief. I mean, thieves have always fascinated me personally in this regard, that, okay, you don't want to work, you don't want to do honest work to make money because you don't want to take the trouble of work. You want to get money easily, but to be a thief, you have to take so much trouble and so much risk. So the act of thieving is risky. You may get killed or injured by the person that you are robbing, and then you are risking going to prison. And all of that, that you're taking that risk instead of the risk of working. I suppose they feel that the cost benefit ratio is better, that they're getting more money. But they may not. They may not actually get more money than they would have gotten by working. In fact, they're not, karmically speaking. But they're willing to risk everything for money. And again, if we think about, later verses about cheating, the people who are willing to break the laws of the government and the laws of the universe in order to get money. And, they're just risking everything for money, thinking that if I have money, and again, artem doesn't just mean money. It means the valuable things of this world. So the things that give us pleasure in this world, the things that money buys, one could say, the pleasures of life, that people are willing to risk their lives for this. Certainly people are willing to risk their lives more and more in modern society for sexual relationships. So, the number one cause of murder is your romantic partner. I think it's like 55% of all murders are either your husband, usually it's a husband, sometimes it's a wife, or your boyfriend or girlfriend, or somebody connected with your romantic relationship, like an in-law or your partner's, your romantic partner's brother or something like that. And people are engaged in illicit activities, and these murders are often connected to illicit sexual behaviors. Not always. Not always. Sometimes it's some proper marriage and it's just people out of control about something else. But it's generally related to some illicit relationship or some suspicion of a illicit relationship. And so people are running after these illicit relationships with a high, risk that they're actually going to get murdered for this relationship. And so this attachment to material things, one is willing to risk one's life for attachment to material things. We could also say this is true of intoxication, that people wanting intoxication so much that they're willing to risk their health. Everybody knows now they're making it very public that alcohol, even small amounts of alcohol, even small amounts of not very alcoholic alcohol like wine, will increase one's cancer risk. So people are willing to take these intoxicants at the risk of terrible, terrible diseases. And everybody knows that when you're intoxicated, you're much more likely to do stupid things or illegal things. And still people, for, this thirst, this trishnam for material enjoyment is so great that they're willing to actually risk their very lives for it. And again, in verse 10, Prabhupada mentions that the ashram system avoids this problem, that if we follow brahmachari, grihastha, vanaprastha, and sannyas, Prabhupada gives the example of rich people in Shastra who take vanaprastha. So the idea of the ashram system is when you're young, you're trained in love of the Lord, and you're trained in a mood of detachment, so that in the prime of life, when the majority of people do and should marry and earn a livelihood, you can do so without this insane attachment, without, that I was talking to one devotee yesterday who she was involved with another devotee who was going to marry her, and he decided not to marry her, which made her extremely sad. And she was saying, I so much want a family. I really want a husband and children. I really, really want a family. And I said to her, Krishna advises desire without attachment, that we can say to the Lord, I'd like a good devotee husband. I'd like to have children, healthy children who take the devotional service, who are worthy citizens of society. This is my desire, but it's up to you, O Lord, whatever you want. If you want to give me this, if you don't want to give me this, I'll accept whatever you decide. And it's the same with money, to just, okay, Lord, I'd like to have a lot of money. I'd like to have money to use in your service. Maybe I want to have money to buy a better car. Maybe I want to have money to buy some furniture that I want or whatever. I'd like this. This is my desire. But it's up to you, Lord. If you want to give it to me, and if you don't want to give it to me, it's up to you. I will accept whatever you want to do. And then whatever we get from the Lord, we do our best to enjoy as his mercy, as his prasadam, and to use in his service. So this training is given in the brahmacharya ashram. And because this training is given in the brahmacharya ashram, then as grihastas, one doesn't have this, even if one's a Vaishya who's supposed to be thirsty for wealth, because they're supposed to provide wealth for the society, they see this as their service. I'm supposed to have, Nanda Maharaj had 900,000 cows. That's a lot more than you. That's not subsistence farming. So if, you see, it's my duty to provide this for society. I'm supposed to generate food and clothing and construction materials and metals and whatever. I'm supposed to provide this for society. Just like a person with a family, they have to earn more than if they're just earning for themselves. So if you're earning for society, but one is seeing this as a service. One is seeing this wealth as Lakshmi Devi, as the internal energy of the Lord, as Bhumi Devi, the land, the cows. This is Bhumi Devi, that I'm taking care of the Lord's beloved, just like the devotees go on the altar and they my daughter sometimes dresses the deities here, Radha Govinda, herself, and sometimes she dresses with somebody else. So sometimes two devotees are on the altar together, and then one of them is dressing Krishna and one of them is dressing Srimati Radharani. So, the person who's just dressing Srimati Radharani. It's the same for the Vaishyas who are thinking, I'm dressing Mother Bhumi. I'm glorifying Mother Bhumi. So one sees this as a service. And then what is the evidence that one sees this as a service? That one can give it up. If you say, my Lord, if I would like this thing, I have this preference for this thing, whether you want to give it to me or not is up to you. If we actually have that detachment, then when there's no longer a facility to use it in service, we can walk away from it. Just like Arjuna, he had all these weapons that he was given, right? Agni gave him all these weapons because of the burning of the Khandava forest. He got weapons when he went to the heavenly planets and so forth. And he got these weapons to use in service. He was a prince and he was part of the ruling family. And this is what he needed for his service. But when it was no longer needed, his weapons, they wouldn't work anymore. He couldn't even string his Gandiva bow. He couldn't even fight off the people who were trying to kidnap Krishna's wives. And he accepted. It's my time to let go. It's my time to let go. That you love your wife, you love you. This is very much written from the point of view of the man because he's talking to boys. You love your wife, you love your husband, you love your children, you love your beautiful couch and your gorgeous, carved wooden bookcase and whatever. Prabhupada talks about animals, so you may love your cows, your dogs, whatever. You love them, you care about them, you take good care of them with affection. And then when it's time to move on, when it's time to devote yourself fully to devotional service, that you can't, to the 64 items of bhakti, that you're no longer able or inclined to work in the world, your children are grown up, you can walk away from those things. So that's the evidence of detachment. Okay, next section is text 11 to 15, where Prahlad Maharaj talks about insatiable family attachments and absorption in family maintenance. And in 11 to 13, Prahlad describes various persons in family life who bind us with affection and how they do so. So how does the wife bind us in affection? Again, he's talking to boys, so he's just talking from the point of view of male to female. Lord Kapila Dev, when he's talking to Devahuti, is talking in the other direction. And Prahlad compares the situation to a cocoon. He says a worm makes a cocoon without a door. He binds itself within a cocoon. Of course, the worm does come out of the cocoon as a butterfly. That's something else. And Srila Prabhupada compares this attachment to a blind well, and he's referencing the earlier statements of Prahlad Maharaj in 755. And Prabhupada says the two senses that bind us in family life are the tongue and the genitals, directly and indirectly. And Prabhupada writes of the necessity of having a spiritual master. So having a spiritual master is also one of the concepts of the ashram system, that the idea was that when you're a child, you have a spiritual master as your teacher. You don't just have a regular teacher. You have a teacher who gives you spiritual instruction. And that carries over then into your household life, so that you've taken the guidance that you received as a child from your spiritual master, and you're applying that in household life, and you're not necessarily living with or next to your guru anymore, but you may also consult with your spiritual master and so forth in household life. And then 14 is the point that attached people are very careful with their money, but they're not very careful with the use of their time. By the way, I went into ChatGPT, and I asked ChatGPT how much time I have left. I did the exercise. Instead of sitting down and doing the math calculations by hand or with a calculator, I just asked ChatGPT to do them. I said, okay, what's my life expectancy? And this is how much I sleep. This is how much I take care of just, physical maintenance. And considering my life expectancy, and I don't smoke and drink, and I'm healthy, how many hours, how many days, how many years, and it came up with about that I have the equivalent of about 11 years. So it was kind of interesting. So how am I using my time? I would say that materialists do think about how they're using their time as much as they think about how they're using their money, but they're not thinking about how they're using their time in terms of the human life is really a special benediction for spirituality. They're not usually thinking like that. People are thinking of how they use their time in terms of what they talk about now, work-life balance. How much time am I spending at work? How much time am I spending with my kids and with my spouse? And how do I kind of balance do I spend time on exercise? Do I spend time doing things that I love? So people do think about this. I mean, it's actually a major discussion among people at the present time, is how am I allocating my time? How am I allocating my energy? Do I have a balanced life? Do I have a life that's fulfilling? They are thinking like that. And some of them are thinking about, of course, the spiritual dimension. I mean, in fact, something that's become very, very popular is the concept of having some time for meditation. And there's, extremely popular apps that you can get to help you meditate. I mean, there's one called Insight Timer. I'm hoping to put some of our Krishna meditations audio on that once that's finished, which is taking us a very long time. But anyway, I'm thinking of doing that so that people can actually, and there are other devotees that also have various meditations on that. There's another like 4 or 5 similar apps like that. So you can go on those apps and you can see how many people around the world are using this app at this moment. And it's not unusual for there to be 25, 30 million people who are accessing this. And of course, there's many, many people doing prayers and meditation and so forth that are not using those sort of facilities. So there people are, definitely, but materialistic people tend not to. They tend to just think about life without having God in the picture. And when I was creating the literacy program for devotee kids, one of the things I did was I looked at a large number of very well-known and well-used existing English literacy programs. This was teaching young children how to read, so like age 4.5 to 7. And I noticed, unless they were produced specifically by a religious organization, like unless it was a Christian publisher in the United States, and there's not so germane here, but why most Christian publishing is, for academic publishing, is going to be in America rather than the other English-speaking countries, has to do with the separation of church and state. But anyway, so unless it was actually done by a religious organization, I found that God was just absent. Even in countries that don't have separation of church and state, like the United Kingdom and Australia and New Zealand, God was just not there. There might be a story for the children about holidays, and it might even be religious holidays. And they're absent God. Christmas without anything to do with Jesus, Diwali without anything to do with Ram or Krishna, Ramadan without anything to do with Muhammad or Allah. So just, what are kind of the external cultural behaviors? Are you lighting lamps? Are you eating this kind of food? Do you have this sort of decoration in your house? And God was just not there. And I thought, children growing up with these stories, with these books, and I read one analysis some time ago about like television and movies. I don't have it anymore, but was some analysis of to what extent people were shown in the media as engaging in religious activities. And it was a very small percentage. And it was interesting, like when they were shown as being religious, like American television and movies, this really fascinated me. When people were shown as being religious, it was almost always Roman Catholicism. And that fascinated me because the majority of Christians in America are Protestant, not Catholic. And still, if they wanted to show in a positive light, oh, the people, the heroes, the good guys of the TV or movies were religious, they would choose Catholicism somehow, and not usually Protestant Christianity or Judaism or Islam or Hinduism. So I found that fascinating. But that means that you can grow up in this culture, and it was very, very rarely shown. So that most movies and TV shows didn't show people engaging in religious activity at all. They didn't pray before they ate. They didn't go to some house of worship. They were not reading scripture, unless it was a show about people a long time ago. Like if it was something, a movie or TV show about people hundreds of years ago, then it might show them as religious. But if it was in a modern setting, it wouldn't. And I was, really thinking about children growing up in this culture and people living in this culture where they're constantly being bombarded in books and in media with this concept that you can have a fulfilling life without God. You can have a fulfilling life without spirituality. And also that spirituality and religion is kind of old-fashioned. It's something that people did, hundreds of years ago, but it's not for us. And the statistics on religious identification are proving this out, that people are less and less and less identifying with a particular religion. They're less and less going to houses of worship. They're less and less doing some kind of religious sadhana of whatever their religion is in their life. So this is Prahlad Maharaj's point here. You might be really, really careful with your money, and you might even be really, really careful with your time, but you're not really, really careful with how much you're cultivating spirituality. This particular aspect of human life, the ability to be spiritual, which doesn't exist generally, with some rare exceptions, in animal life or plant life, they're just missing this. you know. And Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says, quote, he does not understand that his lifespan is dwindling and the goal of human life is lost. And then he writes something very funny. He is only aware of running out of cakes and sweets. However, he does not regret this. I thought this was hysterical. I actually posted it on social media when I was preparing for these classes. And I had a number of devotees comment on this and say, this is me. I just think about how many cakes and sweets I have and not my Krishna consciousness. What was really interesting is that I have a lot of non-devotees who also are my followers on social media. And so I kind of choose what I post with that in mind. I use it very much I use it for connecting with people, but also for preaching. And one of these persons who was a childhood friend and one of the few childhood friends that I have kept up with in my adult life. So he wrote that just reading this quote from Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he does not understand that his lifespan is dwindling and the goal of human life is lost. He is only aware of running out of cakes and sweets. However, he does not regret this. He said that it was just like a wake-up call for him. And I was like, wow, that's so far out. So just cakes and sweets. So do we think like that? Am I running out of cakes and sweets? I mean, I tend to worry about if I'm running out of milk or things like that. But just thinking like that, am I running out of sweets instead of how am I using my life? Prabhupada also says, also makes the point here that attached people are always suffering, but it doesn't mean they don't stop. And the Christian writer C.S. Lewis talks about this. I really like how he describes it in Screw Tape Letters, that, illusion is that you get less and less pleasure out of material life, but you want it more and more and more. And of course, addiction is like that. You're getting less and less pleasure from your alcohol or your tobacco or your cocaine or whatever you're addicted to, but your desire for it increases and increases and increases and increases. And so this is the problem in material life. We want it more and more and more, although it's satisfying us less and less and less. And we just don't think, why is it that I'm wanting this? In verse 15, the point is that this attachment can be so strong that it leads us to cheating or stealing. So that we're not just attached to pious life, to being a good person and enjoying whatever we can get by honest means, enjoying our legitimate spouse and our legitimate children and our honestly earned money. But we so much want things in this world that we're willing to cheat, we're willing to steal, we're willing to do things. This, of course, circles back to the idea of the thief and the mercenary and the merchant risking their life for money. But even an ordinary person, to what extent will they cheat? They'll go someplace where, a kid under 12 is half price and their kid's 13 and they tell their kid to lie about their age. The little cheating in life. Presenting things in such a way that is not exactly truthful in order to get more facility. Okay, then verses 16 through 18 are that even the wise are entangled. Liberation is rare, and you have to take shelter of Lord Narayan. So verse 16 is even apparently wise person think of protecting their own assets, and they're not thinking about, they have a separatist mentality. And it's interesting, this concept of this is mine and that's yours is essential if you want to be a good, honest, spiritualistic person, because it says in the Ishopanishad we should be satisfied with our own quota. So being satisfied with our own quota, distinguishing Krishna has given me as this quota for me, and he's given another quota for somebody else. That's actually part of not cheating. That's the antithesis of cheating and stealing. is being able to distinguish that this is the amount of money that's been given to me, and that person's money, I don't have any claim on that unless they want to voluntarily give it to me. I can't just take it from them. This is the wife that I've been given. I can't take that other person's, more attractive wife who's a better cook or whatever. I can't steal her away from her husband because she's his wife. This is my wife. This is true even when it comes to time and energy. I don't have the right to impinge on someone's time and energy unless they want to voluntarily give it to me. I can't take what is not mine. So why are we talking about that? This is a lack of spirituality to think in terms of this is mine and this is theirs. So this is a question of thinking this is mine to do with as I like. This is mine. And again, I something that C.S. Lewis wrote in Screwtape Letters that I found very illuminating in this regard, that to think that this is mine in terms of this is my quota given by the Lord that I'm supposed to take care of versus this is mine that I can do with as I like. I can break it. I can smash it. This is the difference between this idea we often find in modern Christians about the dominion over the earth, that people are given dominion over the earth, which means I can just, I can kill the animals. I can just exhaust the soil because it's mine versus the concept of stewardship, that this earth belongs to God, my wealth belongs to God, my wealth belongs to Krishna, and I take care of it in his service for him. But I have my area that I'm taking care of, right? I'm taking care of these children and this spouse and this building because that's what's given to me. I don't go in your house and take care of your kids. So this is a separatist mentality. I have a mentality separate from Krishna, and this kind of mentality leads to war. It's actually very similar to the territorial mood of animals. One time when I was walking at our property in Mayapur, so I'm within the property, okay? Like I'm within the gates, and I'm walking on one of the roads, kind of the backside of the chakra building. And there were these two dogs arguing over the street. And I'm thinking, this street doesn't belong to either of you guys. It belongs to the temple. It's not yours. They're arguing, who owns this part of the road. And this can happen even to very wise persons. We have very wise persons, very educated. They know volumes of material. Why is Prabhupada saying this? Because the children can say, well, we're going to school, we're listening to our teachers, we're going to be educated, we're not going to have this problem. And Prahlad Maharaj says, no, you are, even if you're very well educated. Okay, also in text 16, Prabhupada again stresses the system of ashram dharma, especially vanaprastha and sannyas. He keeps bringing up varnashram and especially ashram dharma. Okay, verses 17 to 18. So instead of having our material desires move us around, and instead of being a puppet of our material desires, we should worship the Lord of all gods, namely Narayana, and stay aloof from demoniac association. Okay, kids, you may be sons of demons, but you need to keep yourself aloof from demoniac association and worship Narayana. Alrighty. So our questions were, what were the external manifestations of material attachment and what's the solution? And the answer we find here is that material attachment consists of the various pleasures we get from others, especially family members, and an extreme thirst for material opulence, and that no amount of learning or theory will free us. We need to worship the Lord. All right, we are at our break time. I will see you again at the beginning of the hour for those of you not in India or Nepal, and the bottom of the half hour for those of you on your 1.5 hour time zones. Okay, and please, again, as I always say, please take a real break. Stand up and move around. Hare Krishna. Hope you all had a good break. All right. I'd like each of you to start off. I'd like everyone to do this. It's something I want everybody to do. in this whole section of verses 9 to 18, I'd like you to figure out at least 5, somewhere between 5 to 7 difficulties that Prahlad Maharaj mentioned that act as obstacles for householders to take up spiritual life. And if you can just write them in the chat, find at least 5 and up to 7 obstacles that Prahlad Maharaj mentions for in family life that prevent people from taking up spiritual life. Okay, this is an important one. Pulastamani, lack of distaste for material life. Excellent. Shri Radhagovinda, maybe you could define compliance. Everyone should come up with at least 5. Come up with at least 5. Compliance with all the balance of duties. Okay. Uncontrolled senses. Good. Okay. Despite the risk of cheating going on, yes. Lack of time for Krishna consciousness, yes. Okay. Strong desire to accumulate money, all time dedicated to family affairs, sinful acts to increase one's comfort. Excellent. Ignorance about true proprietor. I like that one. I really like that one from Ekanta. Material duties, overcome by ignorance. Okay. Mentality of mine and others. Again, that needs to be understood very carefully, but yes. Not that we think everything is mine. All right. So we have, I'm going to just put it in the chat because otherwise some of you asked me to repeat my question. So my first question is that household life is actually a kind of license for a materially attached person by which to enjoy sense gratification under regulative principles. Otherwise, there is no need of entering household life. That's in the purport to text 9. So how can this be used and how can this be abused? So anybody would like to raise their hand? How can this quote be properly used and how can this quote be abused? Or if you're too shy to raise your hand, you can write something in the chat. But you can scroll up if you want to read my question. You can scroll up in the chat. We have seen quotes like this abused and misused in the Hare Krishna movement. So I would like to know how they can be used and how it can be misused. Asit Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Mataji.
Hare
Prabhupada
Krishna.
says that though it's regulative, but the chances of accident are also there even on the royal roads also. So one has to be very, very careful. So the purpose is not to remain there. The purpose is to target and come out of it. So one has to be very careful while driving on this path. And one has to exit.
Okay. Actually, I heard one sannyasi say that the only purpose of household life is to get out of it. And I would respectfully disagree that that's the only purpose. I think there's some other purposes. Okay, Sri Radhagovinda says, making people feel guilty to enter grahastha life. That's a big problem. Because if you're feeling guilty about it, you're probably not going to do it very nicely. You're probably going to be cruel to your spouse and, you know. Some other thoughts. How can this be properly used? And how can it be misused? Juti Priya Radha, yes.
Yes, Mataji, I heard from one of a very senior devotees saying, Grihastha devotees, that we should perform our Grihastha life in such a way that, you know, by the end of it, we should have a feeling, I'm done with everything. It was so nice that I don't want it again. I'm done with it.
I like that. I like that, yes. So I remember when I first entered the Vanaprastha ashram, if ever my mind would wander to, oh, so nice being a grahasta, and I'd say, wait a minute, you've been there, seen that, done that, and it had nice parts and not nice parts, and do you really want to do that again? It's like, nah, not really. That you feel satisfied. Yes, proper use is making Krishna the center and serving the whole family. Yes. Does grahastha life have some value? Oh, I like this. Abused by taking it as an excuse to cover one's own attachment, Mahalakshmi. Very nice. Does grahastha life have any use? I mean, Prabhupada seems to say here, it doesn't have any use at all, right? He says, otherwise there's no need of entering household life. So then we can ask, well, why does Prahlad Maharaj enter household life? Because he does. He gets married. So why do these great souls who are already completely attached to the Lord and already completely detached, why did they get married? Okay, develop patience, forgiveness, practice love and affection. Okay, I like that. Are there some other uses for household life? To serve the other ashrams. Okay.
Mataji, I feel that, let me tell you about myself. When I was Brahmachari, I used to ask, whichever sannyasi I would meet, I said, should I get married? I would ask, I would desire, but should I get married? He will say, no, delay it as long as you can. Just be a Brahmachari. And
God.
then after that, other sannyasi, well, if you have a desire, you should get married. So finally, I got married. And
Oh,
then, there was a
oh,
big change in my level of service I used to do, reduction in seva because I got busy with other things. But in the end, I've been married like 30 years now. And I see that, there's a sort of a more sense control that has developed over time.
mm,
Yes. And a deeper understanding of the material nature, that how difficult it is. And then whoever I see, I said, don't get sucked into getting attached in his household life. You need to prepare for detachment. So the
mm.
detachment becomes easier because you can see the challenges, that the things you're getting sucked into in household life. It's so difficult. All of these things Prahlad Maharaj is seeing, actually saying, I personally have experienced all of it.
Yeah, they're all true.
They're all true.
Now, interesting when you say about delay it as long as possible. That is the antithesis of the ashram system.
Yes.
That is not the ashram system. That is not ashram dharma. Ashram dharma is not marry as late as possible. That is not ashram dharma. And that's the fact that we have people still preaching in our Hare Krishna movement, stay in the brahmacharya ashram as long as you can, delay marriage as long as you can, is one of the reasons why I say that if we try to preach ashram dharma to devotees, people are not so open to it. Ashram dharma is actually you marry when you're young.
Right. Right.
You marry when you're young, when the desires for all of the aspects of marriage are the strongest. I mean, I've heard people say, don't marry when the desires are the strongest. It's like, what? It's like saying, don't eat when your appetite is at its peak, don't eat when you got peak digestion abilities, And also when you're young, your fertility is greater, you're more likely to be able to have children, you're more likely to be able to have healthy children. That's just a medical fact. And then when the natural detachment of middle age comes, which it comes to pretty much everyone, your children will be grown up and you will have done the proper thing at the proper time and you're ready to move on. So proper things done at the proper time. Oh, and a number of people talking about that one benefit of grahastha life is to produce good children. I find that this aspect of grahastha life is also very much minimized or discouraged among the devotees, to tell people don't get married, and if you marry, don't have children, and if you have children, just have one. We don't produce schools for our children. We don't produce facility for our children. So this is all ways in which we're kind of mitigating against proper ashram dharma. So yes, all the other ashrams depend on grahastas. So grahastas are supposed to be providing two things for society in general: good children and honest wealth, according to their varna. And both of these things are needed. You need to have good children and you need to have honest wealth. And so somebody's got to be producing the wealth in society. If everyone's a renunciate, I mean, if you're living at the beginning of Satya Yuga where there were no ashrams and no varnas, and the trees are just producing fruit and the weather's always nice. Okay, we have proper use: treating wife and children as a gift from Krishna, caring for them as souls rather than attachment, and potential for misuse, license for excessive sense gratification, which can be done if you're creative enough, even while you're adhering to the regulative principles. Yes, that's a fact. Association with devotees. Here we have Pulastamani's quoting. So I had to give some guarantee of my honesty. So in that program, the question was whether married or unmarried, because unmarried man mostly becomes dishonest. So that inquiry was there whether he is married. Married man cannot be dishonest because he's got responsibility. If he is arrested, he will be insulted in his family. His family members will be in difficulty. Therefore, he does not commit dishonesty very easily because it is absolutely, but that should not be done. But unmarried man, because he's got no responsibility, he commits all kinds of sinful activity. That's a fact. Thank you for that quote, Prabhu. In modern society, it's illegal now. If you're employing someone to ask about their marital status, it would be considered discrimination. But it is a sociological fact that married people are less likely to be criminal, especially men. Especially men. The most uncontrolled, criminal, dangerous element in society are young, unmarried men. Yes? Yes? Am I correct? Their car insurance is higher. Why? Young, unmarried men. They have to pay more in car insurance. They're much more likely to commit crimes of any variety. And if a man is married, or interestingly enough, if he's engaged also, if he's got a fiance, just a girlfriend doesn't do it. But if he's engaged to be married, or if he's married, he is far more many, many, many times more likely to be an honest, reliable, ethical person. Yes, 90% of prison inmates are men. And the majority of those men were not with a wife or some woman that they planned to marry. It seems to be a fact that women civilize men. That just seems to be a sociological fact. And children civilize men. This, again, just seems to be a statistical fact. There's also statistical evidence that men who have daughters, Prahlad Maharaj talks about how the father is especially attached to his daughter, and even when his daughter's married, he's always thinking of her. Men who have daughters are more charitable. So married men are more charitable than single men. Men who have children are more charitable than men without children. And men who have daughters are more charitable than men who only have sons. There's some kind of civilizing effect, moralizing effect, culturalizing effect. I don't know if those are real words. I may be making them up. Of women, good women. There's some sort of beneficial effect for society, some kind of stabilizing effect in society. Yes, you say good wife protects her husband from his own senses and gives him inspiration and strength. So there is this positive side of Grahastha life, that married men are going to be more honest, they're going to be more responsible. They just are. They're going to be more charitable, they're less likely to commit crimes, and so forth. And absolutely our biggest problem in society is young, unmarried men. They're the biggest risk and problem across the board. So definitely for the majority of people, it's far better for them to get married young and have a family young. And this was done in human society for millions and millions and millions and millions. and millions and millions and millions of years. However, the very thing that civilized people and brings them to morality and ethics can also drag them away from spirituality. What does it mean, young? Well, the peak fertility for women is 18 to 20. Peak fertility for men is 20 to 22. So if you want to look at about biological, I'm unabashedly an extremely conservative person. So if you want to look at biology, and if you want to look at the laws of nature being indicative of the laws of God, then I would say that the age of marriage should correspond with the ages of peak fertility and peak sexual desire, which are hovering somewhere around 20. I mean, Prabhupada talks about 24 for men as maximum and 16 for women as maximum, which is, of course, 16 for women as maximum is not legal practically anywhere in the world anymore. So that couldn't be done. But you also had a society where people got married that young. You had extended society, you had the help of a village, you didn't have people just being on their own. But that's, if we want to look at tradition of all human beings for millennia, and if we want to look at biology, then we're hovering somewhere around the age of 20. So, yeah. And I'm not sure statistically at what age people start engaging in sexual intercourse, but it's probably also even lower than that. Shouldn't it also be dependent on their financial stability? Well, see, this is a problem about modern society without extended family. You know, Prabhupada got married in his 3rd year of university, and Srila Prabhupada was astonished when he came to America and he asked one Indian woman, "Why isn't your son married?" And she said, "Well, I have no objection to him getting married if he can maintain a wife." This response from this woman was something that Prabhupada referred to for years. That he said, you know, in your Western countries, if you can just maintain a wife, it's a big deal. And Prabhupada was just astonished by this. Like, why is it so hard to maintain a wife? So, you know, he came from a culture where people were married young and where it wasn't so difficult to live. And you had extended family and you had a village. And so the Industrial Revolution has messed all of this up. So that people are thinking, you know, okay, I've got to finish my education. That's going to take me till I'm 25, and I've got to get my master's and PhD. And, you know, we're looking now at people marrying in their late 20s or even up in like 28 to 35, which does not it doesn't make any sense biologically, and it doesn't make any sense psychologically. It doesn't make any sense biologically in terms of desire. It doesn't make any sense biologically in terms of capacity to produce healthy children. It just doesn't make any sense at all. To one's peak energy, to doing something for the world, that youthful energy and idealism to actually help the world and do some service in the world should be happening at that time. So this has all gotten skewed in industrialized society, where people are in school for such a long period of time and so forth. So which is why I keep saying that promoting ashram dharma like Prabhupada is doing in these purports one after another, it's very difficult. You'll talk about it and people, well, we can't do that. Well, we can't do that. Well, we can't do that. We can't do that. It's a real problem. And even devotees in our movement who talk about varnashram generally don't hit this aspect of how householder life can be done properly and how you can properly move through the ashrams. All right, now we're going to have we had the heavy one about grahastas. So now, in the interest of being balanced and attacking everybody equally, we're now going to have a heavy quote about sannyas. So in the purport to text 9, Prabhupada says, unless one is master of the senses, he should not accept the renounced order of like sannyas. Jayadurji Maharaj told me that of the sannyas, of the people who took sannyas when Prabhupada was on the planet or shortly afterwards, that 80% of them gave up their sannyas. So like anyone who took sannyas from, 1970 to like 1985, 86, I don't know exactly what the years were, 80% of them were not able to maintain it. I mean, Prabhupada in some cases were giving sannyas to men who were 20. All right. Now, before you start answering this question, I want to bring up something that my godbrother Kipamoya Prabhu brought to my attention. And he was saying that, we have a rule now in ISKCON is you can't take sannyas until you're 45. And he said, again, statistically speaking, that celibate men are most likely to have a fall down between ages 45 and 60. You can think about the midlife crisis. And this fact is also one of my main objections to this idea of delay getting married as long as possible, because I have seen so many examples of devotees who were told, just stay brahmachari as long as possible, stay as long as possible, as long as possible, as long as possible. And at somewhere between age 45 and 50 is when they usually crack. And then when they crack, it's not usually pretty. It's not that they usually go to their temple authorities and say, well, I want to get married, because they already have this abhiman of I'm a brahmachari, I'm a brahmachari, I'm a brahmachari. So generally their household life starts with something that, how shall we say, was not so paka. And one devotee that I know well, I remember talking to him, he was like 41, 42. And I said, Prabhu, you really need to be married. And he says, well, yeah, but they all say, just stay, you just stick it out, you'll be able to get through it. And then he contacted me when he was like 44. And he said, well, I got married, but the circumstances of my getting married were such that they threw me out of the temple and I lost all my service. And I said, I don't even want to hear about it. I said, generally when people marry at that point, it's involving some sort of scandal. And another devotee that I know very well, was got married at 50 and was saying, oh, now I can't preach anymore. I'm like, just pick yourself up and go on. So I see this side of things, of pushing renunciation. So thoughts on this? You can raise your hand, write in the chat. Again, I unapologetically am a very conservative person who.
I actually, many times people ask me, should I get married? That if you're
Yeah.
thinking you should get married, then you better get married soon, right away. Yes. Otherwise later on you will repent and it will be too late. You'll be very late in life. And then if you have children, then when will you retire?
Yes.
So because the children will not grow up when you're ready to retire. So do it ASAP. And then secondly, based on my experience of, that after you have married long enough, you feel a good sense control, very good sense control, naturally, so natural. So, somebody after at this age, if he, can, renounce or go into vanaprastha and stay in vanaprastha. I'm not even talking about sannyas. I'm not even thinking of that level of qualification for myself. But if I in vanaprastha, I will call it success, big success. Because sannyas means you have to have very good, deep understanding of Siddhanta, of Shastra. It's not just, calling yourself sannyasi. So that's another level that, a grihastha, it's very rare for a grihastha to have time to study the Vedic literatures to that level of depth.
Well, here, all of you in the Bhakti Vedanta program, you're all going to be qualified like that.
So, we kind of have high level information, and you still have to
I really appreciate what you said. And I have found this to be true. I have found that taking Vanaprastha after having a Grihastha life, it's very natural. It's just very natural. You're just naturally done. And you're not naturally done because you hated your household life, but because those things, all the desires that brought you into household life were satisfied at the proper time and in the proper way in relationship to Krishna. And it's just this natural progression. It's not something forced. Mahalakshmi, I like what you're saying here. There are devotees, young and elder, who do not see their material attachments and they think that they're detached. Yes. But this mentality is exacerbated by our don't get married. You know, it's hard for people to see what their attachments are. Any other thoughts on this? Yes, if you take sannyas and you're not mature, it causes great havoc, and it really does. Oh, Narada Rishi, yes. Sannyas in our movement might work better if we did not make the ashram for superstars and give them wealth to manage. Yeah, probably. I think we have some confusion because, when Prabhupada was here, he was the only elder and he was everything. So he's a sannyasi, but he's also had to manage the movement because all of his disciples were so young and inexperienced. But yeah, I think about some sannyasis I know in our movement who really live like sannyasis. I can count them on the fingers of one hand, but where they really, I mean, it's modern society, obviously, but they really do their best to live as sannyasis. Yeah, so people think, Murari, Prabhu, you're making this point. People think that after I take sannyas, I'll be able to control my senses, but it's no. First, you control your senses, then you can take sannyas. The sannyas ashram isn't going to make you control your senses. How could we look at this statement in kind of another way, kind of the opposite way of encouraging those people who really are qualified to either skip the grahastha ashram or take sannyas after going through the grahastha ashram? Okay, Prasant, you're saying devotees who are born naturally detached, it's fine for them to take sannyas early on. Yes. But for most people, it's not recommended. Yes, what's interesting, Prasant Prabhu, is I keep reiterating this, Prahlad Maharaj got married. So our Shastra is also full of examples of devotees who didn't have these personal desires, and they got married anyway. In fact, most of the examples in our Shastra are like that, where even if they were totally detached. Okay, yeah, a lot of us sannyasis are doing so much management that I remember there one sannyasi that I know quite well told me he had been married before he joined the movement, and his wife was interested in Krishna consciousness, but not like full on. So they didn't have children, and he was in university at the time. In those days, people did get married before they graduated. Anyway, he was at the end of his university training. He didn't get his degree. And he left the devotee said, well, you could die at any moment, give everything up, move in the temple. So he left his wife, left his education, moved in the temple. And he not only took sannyas, but he became a GBC and guru. And I was visiting the temple where he stays. And there was one of the ladies there who was going through some struggle. Her husband had left her and blah, blah. And I was discussing this with him because she was his disciple. And he said, Urmila, I gave up my wife. I didn't have any children. I took sannyas, and now I have the burden of all these women and children. He said, yeah, I walked away from this in my own life, and I'm just constantly burdened with all these women and children. And I said, well, then how do you deal with that? And he said, my service to Radha and Krishna. He said, that's my solace. That and I mean, when we said it was most dramatic, but I've also heard this from other sannyasis, oh my goodness, I gave up my own wife and kids, and here I am dealing with so many grahastas and so many women and children. Okay, Prahlad's marriage: to be a king, you need to have a queen. Yes, to expand the dynasty, to provide for succession, and so many things. Yes, this was with Priyavrata. When Priyavrata was asked to become the king, he's like, well, I guess I got to get married. And you could say, well, couldn't you be, I mean, like we have, we do have not married political leaders, but generally it's like that. Yeah, plus some devotees who, despite being grahastas, they perfectly balance the art of renunciation. Definitely. Even grahastas can have good sadhana and sense control and can take our institution ahead. Yes, and we see that all the time. Like when Prabhupada sent 3 grahastas to London, young grahastas. And he said, you've done more than my sannyas godbrothers who were sent to London. Okay, give the sannyas proper association who are thriving in the sannyas ashram. That's kind of the mood right now of sannyas preparation. But I would also say that there are devotees who really should not marry. Yes, Ekanta.
Hare Krishna. Mataji Urmila, what is your personal point of view? Why such a renowned devotee as Prahlada Maharaja finally got married? Because his preaching is very strong against, it seems so, against Grihastha.
Yeah, this is something that struck me over and over and over again about Prahlad Maharaj, or like Dhruva Maharaj, who had 2 wives, even though he had so many problems with his father's 2 wives. That it's not the thing in and of itself, but it's a question of whether or not it's being used in service. And Prahlad Maharaj was given the service by Nrsingadev directly. Nrsingadev said, I want you to become the king of the demons. Like Priyavrata, that's your service to do. And that's just part of it. One isn't supposed to take, one is like Bhishma, who doesn't marry. He's a Kshatriya and doesn't marry. It's not supposed to be like that. The Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Shudras are all supposed to marry. And most of the Brahmins get married as well. This concept for Bhishma that you're not going to marry, you're not going to have children, was weird. And it actually caused all kinds of problems in the succession of ruling. His brother Vichitravirya died without children, and Vyasadeva fathered the children, and then that was a problem. And you had Dhritarashtra, who's blind, and then he wants his sons to be the king. And in theory, I mean, we don't want to do the logical assumption. We don't want to do assumption contrary to fact. You can't say what would have happened. But, logically speaking, if Bhishma had married and had kids, that all could have been avoided. So who should never marry? I had an interesting discussion with Prahladananda Swami many years ago. And he was talking about how his temple president basically ordered him to marry. Said, okay, everybody should get married, and this is the girl I want you to marry, and here you go. So I don't know if they had a fire jagger or they got legally married, or both. I really don't know. But he told me, so he said, I married this woman, and we would just sit together and read Shastra. I don't know if any of you know Prahladananda Swami, but he has memorized the whole Bhagavad Gita, and he's memorized the whole Krishna book, and he spends like 2 to 4 hours a day reading Srila Prabhupada's books. I think he's read the Bhagavad Gita now like 200 times, and he's read the Bhagavatam like 20 times or something like that. My guess is he's the most prolific reader in the whole Hare Krishna movement. He's just seeped in Shastra. So he sits down with his wife, and he said, we're reading Bhagavad Gita, and she would fall asleep. And he said, after 2 weeks, she left me because she realized that I was never going to fulfill her material desires the way she wanted. And after that, I never married. People like that should not marry. People who are just, they're natural renunciates, and they they're just not into Grihastha life. It's just, they actually would make terrible husbands or terrible wives. They're natural renunciates. So there are people like that. They're in a minority, but there are people like that. We have, of course, our very famous Prasanta, who heads the VIHE. And she said when she was a young woman, and as most young women, she was attractive. And so people would come to her and say, so, are you going to marry? Are you going to marry? And she told me that, she said when she would tell them, well, no, I don't want to get married, then they would argue with her. And she said that one senior devotee told her that whenever anyone asks you about marriage, you should just say not yet. So she told me people would come up to her and, are you going to get married? And she'd act all shy and she'd say, well, not yet. And then people would leave her alone. And she's a natural renunciate. She just has no interest. And no proclivity, no inclination. It's not that these people hate householders or that they hate householder life. It doesn't hold any interest for them. So people like that should not marry. If they marry, they'll mess it up. It's not where they belong. So there are people like that, but they're definitely in the minority. One of my god sisters said that people should be urged to marry, and only those who really resist it should be, who really are not interested and who are very emotionally, mentally balanced people without marriage should be allowed to be renunciate. She said, what we tend to do is we push people not to marry, and only the ones who crack marry. And she said, actually, the Vedic system is exactly the opposite. My own personal realization is that people should be able to have this internal balance of masculine and feminine with their worship of Shri Shri Radha and Krishna, so that they don't need to balance these energies externally. That most of us need some sort of balance. And I bring up the example, maybe this is highly controversial, and maybe it's probably not absolutely true, but even in most homosexual relationships, one of the partners tends to take the role of each gender. There's a strong urge in us to have this male-female balance. And if people are immaturely renounced, then they'll try to steal energy from the opposite sex in some way to try to balance themselves. Is it a function of how they're wired by nature, or is it that they're very attached to vairagya? There are a lot of nice question, Prasant Prabhu. There are a lot of grihastas who have high vairagya tendencies. So high vairagya tendencies is not, and a love for vairagya is not necessarily indicative of renunciation. Like I have a friend who's a very successful businesswoman, and she has vairagya near the top of her list as what's really important to her. And that manifests for her in being able to travel a lot and living a very simple life, not being tied down to a particular schedule, like having kind of a minimalist lifestyle. Is it how you're wired by nature? Possibly. I'm sure a lot of this shows up in an astrological chart, that, what experiences we've had in a previous life is going to play into this very much so. And part of it is probably also nurture. Very difficult to tease out the difference between nature and nurture. Right. And we, I keep talking about the fact that Prahlad was married. Srila Prabhupada was also married. It's not just Prahlad Maharaj in the verses. It's Prabhupada in the purports. Heavy stuff about household, but Prabhupada married. Prabhupada got married when he was 22, and he took Vanaprastha when he was 54, I believe. So, it's, and of course, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur was married. The majority of our Mahajanas were married. So it's It's not that we're like anti-marriage. And as far as being able to figure out if you're a renunciate at a young age, I mean, my general advice, which I don't know anyone who's doing it, is that like in our brahmacharya ashram, within 2 years, we should try to figure out if people are really wired to be lifetime renunciates or if they should marry, and then we should train them accordingly. Either train them for a lifetime of renunciation in service to the mission, or train them how to become grahastas in service to the mission. And so that when they leave the brahmacharya ashram, they can go on to become grahastas or vanaprasthas and take some responsibility in the mission. But anyway. Okay. So, all right. I'm going to pull out, I don't know if I have 2 more things, but I want to do at least one. And this is another controversial, difficult thing. As you all see, I do not shy away from this stuff. I like to hit it head on. Okay. So here's my question. So in the purport to 17 and 18, Prabhupada says, in the history of human society, no one at any time or any place has been liberated because of too much affection and attachment for his family. When we met with Srila Prabhupada in 1976 in New York, so our oldest son was 1.5 years, and he was sitting in my lap. And Srila Prabhupada was talking to my father, and Prabhupada motioned to me, and he said, just like this mother is loving her son without any expectation of return, in the same way you should love Krishna. And my father said, will loving her son help her to love Krishna? And Prabhupada said, no. Loving Krishna will help her to love her son. I keep hearing in the Krishna consciousness movement that, you know, your love for your wife, your love for your husband, your love for your children will help you to love Krishna. And every time I hear that, I'm like, no, it doesn't work that way. And if we think about family attachment as it's depicted in the modern world, so ironically, although in the modern world, people are marrying later and later, and fewer people are marrying altogether, there's a growing number of people but they're not renunciates. They're engaged in so many illicit relationships, but they're not marrying. They're not marrying, they're not having children. Even so, in this society, family attachment is super glorified. You know, the person who'll sacrifice everything for their wife, for their husband, for their kids, for their parents, for their brother, for their sister. That's like the pinnacle of morality. They'll let the world blow up if they can save their wife. And most religions are really push this. You know, Islam, Christianity, Judaism, they really push family attachment. You know, loving your family, taking care of your family, again, as like the highest pinnacle of goodness, the highest pinnacle of morality, the highest pinnacle of sacrifice, and so forth. Right? So I'd like to look at this statement that Prabhupada makes, that your family attachment is not going to be what liberates you. Now, I'd first like to ask, oh, this is going to be a heavy question. He says, in the history of human society, no one at any time or any place has been liberated because of too much affection and attachment for his family. Can you think of an exception? Can you think of anybody in the Shastra who was liberated because of too much attachment to their family? I can.
Ajamil.
Ajamil! Woohoo! Another example.
Dhruva's mother.
Dhruva's mother. Excellent. Another example. Brahmacharya. Was that the cause of his liberation? His attachment to family?
I don't know. Is Hiranyakashipu possible? Because Prahlad's attachment to his dad, in spite of whatever he did.
Yeah, Devahuti being attached to her family. Well, at the end of this Leela we're reading, we read that the family, Archie with Prithu, yes. We read that the family of Prahlad Maharaj, that is, he's going to have so many generations liberated, right? Not only Hiranyakashipu, but so many generations. And Srila Prabhupada explains in a purport there. He says, how far do we know? We know maybe our great-grandparents. Most of us don't know our great-great-grandparents. And we might know our great-grandchildren, but we don't usually know our great-great-grandchildren. But it certainly doesn't go beyond that. We don't, in terms of attachment, Prabhupada says it's all, Gantari, yes. Prabhupada says it's all about attachment. And therefore, Prabhupada says this liberating of family members by Prahlad is over many lifetimes, because he would only liberate a few generations in that lifetime. So in order to have all those generations liberated by Prahlad, it would have to span other lifetimes for people who actually knew him. In other words, if I become a devotee, I could liberate my parents who were attached to me, maybe my grandparents who were attached to me. Actually, only one living grandparent when I was growing up. I had one living great-grandparent for briefly when I was a young child. But I'm not going to liberate my grandparents who didn't know me, who didn't have any attachment to me. It's a question of attachment. So if you're attached to a family member who gets liberated, you can also get liberated due to your family attachment. I'm thinking about the 50 wives of Sobari Muni. He went back to Godhead, and it says specifically in the Bhagavatam that they went back to Godhead because they were attached to him as their husband. And actually, a point Prabhupada makes all over the Bhagavatam is that if a woman has a husband who's a pure devotee and she's attached to him, that she can go back to Godhead. Prabhupada also says your children can bring you back to Godhead. Like we have the example of Ajamil. Prabhupada writes this about Dhruva and his mother. He said something like, although I'm, fallen in so many ways, I hope I have a disciple who's going to take me back to Vaikuntha. So then if there's all these scriptural examples, then why is Prabhupada saying in the history of human society, no one at any time or any place has been liberated because of too much affection and attachment for his family? How can that be a true statement? Oh, okay. Ladies who say, I don't have to do anything myself, I'll just follow my husband. You have to become attached to a devotee. All right. Who were born, it doesn't apply. That was the point I was just making, Mahalakshmi. It doesn't apply to those who were born 7 generations before. It only applies to those who actually know you and were attached to you. Those other generations are in other lifetimes who were attached to you. Maybe I didn't make that clear. So what is the thing that's liberating all these people? Yes, Mahalakshmi, but that's not in one lifetime. You can look it up. It's connection to a devotee. Yes. Who happens to be a family member. This is also what Prabhupada told my father in 1974. When my father said, I'm not coming to the temple to see Krishna, I'm coming to see my daughter and son-in-law. And Prabhupada said, they are loving Krishna and you are loving them. So 2 things equal to the same thing are equal to each other. So if our family attachment ends up being, we were starting out that I'm attached to this person because they're my son or they're my husband or they're my wife or they're my this or my that. Oh, who in the Shastra got liberated because of their wives?
Kalia.
Kalia. That's cool, huh? The Brahmanas didn't actually get liberated. They respected their wives. They said our wives should be our guru, but they didn't really follow them. It said they were too afraid of Kamsa. So they didn't. They're like, we should, but they didn't do that. But Kaliya, yeah, it was his wives. Yeah. So the idea is that if we become attached to a family member who's a devotee, then we're becoming attached to a devotee, and it's the attachment to a devotee that liberates us. Yes. Yes. Like I wasn't able to be there when my father passed away. I got there 2 hours too late. But what I was told was that the last thing he said is that he knew that I was on my way. I got to be with my mother. I didn't get to be with my father. But he knew that I was on the way. And he said, tell her that she was always my favorite. I was his youngest daughter, youngest of 3 daughters. He said, tell her that she was always my favorite. And whenever I think of her, I think of Krishna. So that was the last thing he said before he died. So what isn't going to liberate us is just ordinary family attachment. You know, I love my wife so much. I'm such a good husband. I'm so devoted to my wife. I'm so devoted to my husband. That's not going to liberate anybody ever. Yeah, animals do that. There are animals that are really good family members. In fact, there are some animals that are better family members than humans. Yes, Nilamani.
Yeah, so it is, where's the emphasis on the family so much, right? It's clearly important to be attached to a devotee. If they happen to be a family member, that's fine. But if not, I mean, as I was making a point earlier, the family is at a bodily level. It's just in this lifetime, they're this family, right? And beyond this
Yes.
lifetime, who knows what family they were, right? So the whole family concept is being overplayed, I think, right?
Yes. Yes. Well, we can see that it's important, just like I was mentioning earlier. You know, if there's no family, you're going to increase crime in society. You're going to increase unrest. You can't, if you eliminate marriage in society or you greatly delay it, you're going to have social upheaval. You're going to have a really messed up society. However, just being a good family person is not intrinsically spiritual. So if you're attached to a devotee, and if the segue to that was that they were a family member, then that can liberate you. But that's attachment to a devotee that's liberating you. It's not
Right.
attachment to family. All right.
But someone in a family situation could be attached to a devotee that's not part of their family, right?
Absolutely.
Right. Which is probably most of the time that's the case, right? So
Yes. Now, if you're fortunate that you have a family member who is also a great devotee, then you're very fortunate. Are they correct about being just attached to devotee husbands? Well, that depends. So, like we know that we read in the previous section that we can become perfect by doing any of the processes of devotional service, any of the 9 processes. So if you say, well, I'm not going to chant 16 rounds because I'm just going to become perfect by doing another process, it seems to me there's something wrong with one's mentality there. So if someone says, well, I'm not going to do any sadhana bhakti, I'm just going to be attached to my husband who's a devotee. Again, there seems to be, to me, to be some kind of workaround someone's trying to do. You know, I'm not going to really, if that's what happens, you know, Ajamil got liberated just by naming his son Narayana and then having the association of the Vishnu Dutas. But you could say he did sadhana in his youth. Anyway, there are instances of people becoming perfect devotees just by that. But I don't think Subari Muni's wives were intentionally saying, well, I'm going to neglect items of bhakti and just get attached to my husband. I don't think they were saying it. I think that was just kind of circumstantially how things worked out. Does it give a license or recommendation to leave or detach from family who's non-devotee? It can. It can, but don't use that as an excuse for tamagun. So it can. When Maharaj Anga saw that Vena was a demon, he just left in the middle of the night. So it can. I don't want to say that. No, absolutely it doesn't. But don't use that as an excuse for being irresponsible. I've seen that so many times. You know, my spouse is not as good of a devotee as I want them to be, and so I'm going to leave them, and then they just end up with somebody else and causing a disturbance in society, and so forth. Right. Thank you very much. Any mistakes here, please ignore them. Anything good here is from Srila Prabhupada and Prahlad Maharaj and Narada Muni and the Bhagavatam and all of our acharyas, and certainly not from me. Hare Krishna.